I died on the street with my sick child in my arms, while my wife was celebrating her first love's birthday. Those words echoed in my mind as I gasped for air, the world around me fading in and out. The bitter cold of the pavement seared through my skin, and yet, it was nothing compared to the searing pain in my chest. But it wasn't the physical agony that broke me, it was the crushing betrayal that had led me to this moment. I had given everything for her. For Emily. I had worked late hours, put aside my dreams, fought for us, our family. I had promised her the world, even when she told me she was afraid, even when she cried at night, clinging to me as if I were her rock. And in return, she had promised me that we'd be together forever. That nothing, would tear us apart. But now, as I lay there, a dying man, all I could think about was how I had trusted her. How did it come to this? It was supposed to be a simple evening. A simple day. A day to cherish the time I had left with my son, who was battling an illness that I couldn't afford to fight. I had been trying so hard to be strong for him, trying to make his last moments with me as peaceful as possible. But she wasn't there. She wasn't with me. Instead, she was celebrating her past, celebrating him, the man who once owned her heart, the man who had disappeared without a trace and left her shattered. And now, after all these years, after everything I'd done for her, she chose to go back to him. Chose to celebrate his life while mine came to an abrupt, painful end. As the world turned to darkness, my last thought was simple: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Before the day I died, everything seemed perfect. Or so I thought. Emily and I met when we were both barely 20, young, wild, and full of dreams. I was just starting out, working at a small but ambitious tech startup. Emily was this brilliant, headstrong woman with a contagious laugh and a smile that made you feel like the world was right. She had an energy that lit up a room, and for reasons I could never quite explain, I found myself drawn to her from the first moment we met. She was beautiful, not just in the obvious ways, but in the way she made you believe that you could be more than you were. She was someone who made you feel like anything was possible. And I needed that. I needed her. My family had never been perfect. Growing up in a broken home, I spent most of my childhood feeling like an outsider. I wasn't someone who belonged anywhere, but Emily. Emily made me believe I had a place in this world, that I could have something to hold on to. We moved in together a year later. Our first apartment was small, the walls thin, but it didn't matter. It felt like a home. By then, we were in love, and even though we both had our own careers to build, we always made time for each other. We got married when I was 25, her 24. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, everything I thought I could ever want. For the next few years, it was a whirlwind, just the two of us against the world, battling life's challenges and taking on everything it threw our way. We were building our future together, one brick at a time. But then, things began to change. Slowly. Quietly. I didn't even see it coming. At first, it was just the little things. Emily, once the woman who made me feel like I was the center of her universe, started pulling away. She was distracted more often, her gaze distant when I spoke to her. I brushed it off at first. Maybe it was stress from work. Maybe she was just tired. But there were nights when she would come home late, too late, and instead of talking to me about her day, she'd retreat into herself. We grew apart in the smallest, most imperceptible ways, and I couldn't pinpoint the moment it happened, but it felt like I was losing her. I tried to hold on, tried to fix things by working harder, doing more. But the truth was, I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know how to fix a marriage that was slowly unraveling beneath my feet. And then, the first cracks appeared. Emily had always been open about her past, about the relationships she'd had before me. One name stood out. David. She'd talked about him in the early days of our relationship, laughing at how young and foolish they'd been. But over the years, I noticed something shift when she spoke about him. There was a longing in her eyes, a vulnerability that she never showed about anyone else. She was careful about it, never fully letting it slip, but I could sense it. David was the one who had left her broken. He was the one who disappeared without a word, leaving her to pick up the pieces. She had told me once that it took her years to move on from him, and I had always believed her. But it wasn't until one night that I learned the truth. I had come home from a late meeting, and she wasn't there. It was well past midnight, and I was exhausted. I didn't think much of it, at first. Maybe she was out with friends, or just needed some space. But then, something told me to check her phone. I wasn't proud of it, but I did it anyway. What I found froze me. A text from David. "It's been too long. I miss you." I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Betrayal? Hurt? It was all of it. My chest tightened as I stared at the message. She had told me David was just a chapter in her past. But clearly, he wasn't. And even more clearly, he still had a hold on her. The days that followed were filled with tension. Emily denied that anything was going on, but I could see it in her eyes, the way she avoided my gaze, the way she never fully explained herself. I asked her about it directly, but she always brushed it off, saying it was nothing. "Just a moment of weakness," she said. But I didn't buy it. We fought. We yelled. We cried. But there was something I couldn't shake, the feeling that she was hiding something from me, that there was more to this story than she was letting on. In the months that followed, Emily's behavior grew even more erratic. The late nights became more frequent, and I began to notice the small things, her phone always face down, the sudden nervousness when she checked her messages, the quiet smile she would get when she thought I wasn't paying attention. The pieces of the puzzle started falling into place, and yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront her again. Part of me didn't want to know. But another part of me, the part that had loved her so deeply, couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to know the truth. And so, one evening, when I came home early, I found her packing a bag. "I'm going to visit my mom," she said quickly, almost too quickly. I could tell she was lying, and it hit me like a punch in the gut. My heart raced, and I felt my stomach drop. I couldn't explain why, but everything in my body screamed that something was terribly wrong. I asked her again, this time with more intensity. "Are you seeing him? David?" For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, with a deep sigh, she nodded. I was frozen, the world spinning around me. I had been right all along. She hadn't just missed him. She was going back to him. The air was thick with silence. Emily stood there, her bag still in hand, her eyes averted, unwilling to meet my gaze. The room felt like it was closing in on me, every breath becoming heavier, suffocating me with the truth I had just discovered. My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of her confession crushing me. "I never meant for it to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she could somehow make the words sound less like a dagger through my heart. I could barely process it. She had lied to me for months, years, maybe. David. Him. The man she had promised me was nothing more than a distant shadow of her past, a ghost she had buried long ago. Yet here he was, resurrected by her own hands. It was worse than I had imagined. Worse than I could ever have prepared myself for. I stared at her, trying to find the words to express the rage, the hurt, the disbelief. But nothing came. I was paralyzed. And then, with a sharp intake of breath, I whispered, "You're leaving me for him." She flinched, like I had struck her. But instead of breaking down, she stood taller, as if she were bracing herself for a final battle. Her lips parted, and for a moment, I thought she would deny it, try to salvage whatever remnants of our marriage were left. But instead, she nodded. "I never stopped loving him," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you, but when he reached out, I couldn't say no." The confession hit me like a freight train. A part of me was dying inside, and another part, the part that had seen this coming, was numb. I should have known, I thought. I should have seen the signs. But I had trusted her, and believed that our love was enough to overcome anything. I had given her everything. But she wasn't the woman I thought she was. And then, like a cruel twist of fate, she dropped the final bombshell. "There's something you don't know," Emily continued, her voice lower now, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. "Something I didn't tell you. Something I couldn't tell you." I took a step forward, desperate for answers. What? What else could there possibly be? She hesitated. I could see the struggle in her eyes, the internal battle she was fighting. I knew she was trying to hold back, but the guilt was too much. Finally, she spoke, her words as sharp as a blade. "I didn't just reconnect with David," she said, her voice breaking. I've been seeing him for the last 6 months. Anne. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. But it didn't matter. The weight of her words had already shattered everything between us. 6 months. 6 months of lying, hiding, and pretending. 6 months of betrayal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rage at her, to tear down the walls she had so carefully built around us. But instead, I stood there, a hollow shell of the man I once was. My thoughts were spinning, a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and disbelief. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long has this been going on?" Emily's eyes welled up with tears. "It started before you even knew he was back. I never planned for it to get this far, but I couldn't stop it. He makes me feel alive again, like I'm not just your wife, your partner. Like I'm me." I could hear the desperation in her voice, but it only made the sting of her betrayal that much sharper. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done to us, she was sorry for herself, for the consequences she now had to face. And that, more than anything, tore me apart. "I loved you, Emily," I said, my voice shaking with raw emotion. "I gave you everything, and you chose him. Choose him over our son, over me. Over us." She couldn't look at me now. She turned away, eyes brimming with tears, but there was no apology in her eyes. No remorse. Just an aching void where the love I thought we shared used to be. And then, as if it wasn't enough, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. As I stood there, struggling to process everything she had just told me, the doorbell rang. I couldn't make sense of it. Who would be at the door at this hour? I could see the panic in Emily's eyes as she looked at the clock, her hand trembling as she wiped away a tear. For a moment, I thought she would run, but she didn't. Instead, she turned back toward me, her face pale, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. "David," she whispered. I froze. The realization slammed into me with the force of a freight train. David was here. Right now. The man who had torn her apart, the man she had abandoned me for, was standing at our doorstep. My stomach twisted in knots as I watched Emily move toward the door, her every step betraying the lies she had built around me. But something inside me snapped. Before she could reach the door, I stepped forward, blocking her path. "No. No, you're not doing this. Not to me. Not to us." She stopped, her face pale, her lips trembling. She knew what I was about to do, what I had to do. And for the first time since she admitted her betrayal, I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes. But it didn't matter. The damage had been done. I grabbed my jacket, my mind made up. I wasn't going to stand here any longer, letting her tear our life apart with nothing but apologies and empty promises. I had to confront David. And I had to do it now. I slammed the door behind me with a force that made the frame rattle. The night air hit me like a slap in the face, but it wasn't the cold that made my skin crawl. It was the bitter realization of what had just happened. I could feel the weight of Emily's betrayal still hanging in the air, choking the life out of every breath I took. But as I walked down the steps of our home, something inside me twisted even further. David was at the door. David was here. For a second, I considered turning back, giving up the confrontation, but that thought vanished almost immediately. I couldn't. Not anymore. I needed answers. But as I stepped into the driveway, I froze. The headlights of a sleek, black car cut through the darkness, and for a moment, I thought my heart would stop altogether. It was his car. David's. I could feel the blood in my veins turn to ice as the car came to a halt in front of me. The door opened, and out stepped David. He was just as I remembered him, tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident, almost arrogant air. His presence radiated power and control. In the past, I had resented how easily people were drawn to him, but now, standing there, I hated him. I hated him for what he had done to Emily. I hated him for what he had done to me. "Nice to see you again," David said, his voice dripping with false politeness. He wasn't even pretending to be sorry. I felt the heat of rage building in me, my chest tightening with every breath. "Stay away from my wife," I spat, my fists clenching at my sides. "This ends tonight." David smiled, that all too familiar smirk that always made my blood boil. "Oh, don't worry. It's already over." His words hung in the air, thick with smugness. "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded, stepping closer. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." David took a slow step toward me, his eyes never leaving mine. "You think Emily is the only one who's been hiding something? You think this is just about her and me?" I frowned, confused. "What the hell are you talking about? You're the one who—" "That's the thing," David interrupted, cutting me off. "It's never just been about her and me. She's not the only one hiding something." I was about to lash out, to scream at him, but his words stopped me cold. There was something in the way he said it, something in his tone, that sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and confusion. David's grin widened. "You're going to want to hear this." Before I could respond, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, and my stomach dropped. I turned around, only to see Emily walking toward us, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't say a word, just stood there, her hands trembling at her sides. "Emily," I said through gritted teeth. "What is this?" She looked at me for a long moment, as though deciding whether to speak, then finally said, He's not the only one who's been hiding something." My mind reeled. I didn't understand. What more could there possibly be? I'd already been betrayed by both of them, but this was something different. It wasn't just about their affair anymore. "You're going to want to sit down for this," David said, his voice almost mocking now. "This isn't just about us." Emily took a deep breath before speaking. "There's something you don't know, something I didn't want to tell you." I shook my head, my heart hammering in my chest. "What the hell is it?" "David didn't just come back into my life randomly," Emily said, her voice shaking. He came to me with a plan. A plan to get you out of the picture." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "A plan to, what?" David's smile faltered slightly, but he didn't back down. Instead, he crossed his arms, his stance casual, almost like he was watching a show. "It's true. I told Emily that if she wanted to be with me, she would have to make sure you were out of the way. I made her an offer she couldn't refuse." I took a step back, the ground beneath me feeling as though it were crumbling. I looked at Emily, my wife, the woman I had loved for years. You did this?" I asked, my voice breaking. She bit her lip, her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know what else to do." I couldn't lose him again. I thought. I thought that if I did what he asked, it would make everything better. I didn't think it would get this far. I felt the air leave my lungs. A plan. A scheme. I had been nothing more than a pawn in their twisted game. Emily had betrayed me on a level I couldn't even comprehend. She had let him manipulate her into playing me. I don't believe this, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. You really thought you could just tear everything apart and still come back from it? David leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She wasn't the only one making deals, though. We both had a stake in this. But the thing is, he trailed off, his voice lowering. The plan didn't go exactly the way I wanted it to. I stared at him, confused. What do you mean? David took a step back, as if preparing to drop another bombshell. It's not just your marriage that's falling apart. Emily wasn't the only one I've been working with. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What the hell are you talking about? I growled, my fists clenching again. David took a deep breath before responding, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. Let's just say I wasn't the only one trying to get you out of the picture. I felt a cold sweat break out across my back as the implications of his words hit me. You've been playing me this entire time, I said, finally putting the pieces together. But who else is in on this? David's eyes glinted with dark amusement, and I knew, I wasn't going to like the answer. Let's just say, he said, stepping closer, you've been surrounded by people who want you gone. People who don't want you alive. The cold realization hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. I had been outplayed, outmaneuvered, and deceived at every turn. I was a fool, a puppet in a game I never knew I was a part of. Emily's betrayal, David's manipulation, they weren't just incidental. They were part of something much bigger, something far darker. I had always been the one who tried to fix things, who worked hard to build a future, to provide. But now, as I stood there in the dead of night, facing the wreckage of everything I thought I knew, I realized I couldn't fix this with words or tears. I had to break the chains. I had to make them feel the weight of their actions. The world had shown me its darkest side. And now, I was going to return the favor. The rage I felt didn't come from a place of mindless fury. No. This wasn't just about getting back at them, it was about strategy. It was about showing them how wrong they were to think they could use me, how they underestimated me. The time for forgiveness was long gone. It was time to make them pay. As I stood there, in the freezing night air, a plan began to take form. I wasn't going to be just another casualty of their betrayal. I would make them regret ever crossing me, regret underestimating what I could do when pushed to the edge. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The first step was simple, information. I needed to gather everything I could about David and Emily, everything they'd been hiding, everything they'd been doing behind my back. But I couldn't just rely on Emily's confession. No. I needed something concrete, something I could use to dismantle them both. I began with David. He was arrogant, always flaunting his success, his connections. He had a reputation, and that reputation would be his downfall. I knew how to exploit it. I started digging through the people he had crossed over the years, former business partners, rivals, even enemies. Everyone had a weakness, a crack in their armor, and David was no different. I made a few discreet inquiries, offered a few well-placed bribes, and before long, I had uncovered a mountain of dirt. David wasn't just a successful businessman, he was ruthless, corrupt, and had built his empire on the backs of those he had destroyed. But the most important piece of information was this. David had been laundering money for years through a series of shell companies. He had hidden it well, but not well enough. I knew how to bring him down. One phone call to the right people, one slip of the tongue, and his world would come crashing down. But that wasn't enough. I needed to hurt him in a way he would feel for the rest of his life. Next, I turned my attention to Emily. Her betrayal had been the catalyst for everything, but what hurt the most was that I had loved her. I had trusted her. The depth of her deception was something I couldn't fully comprehend, but I wasn't about to let it go unanswered. I started revisiting every moment of our relationship, every weakness she had shown me over the years. I had always been the one who cared too much, the one who tried to make things work when things were falling apart. But now, I have to think like a strategist. I had to think like someone who had been betrayed, who had nothing left to lose. Emily's life wasn't as perfect as she'd led me to believe. She had her own skeletons in the closet, and I intended to make them all come tumbling out. The first crack in her armor was her family. Her father was a high-profile figure in the city, and while he had always played the role of the well-respected businessman, his past was far from clean. I knew about the shady deals he had made, the connections he had with underground figures. All it took was one phone call, one whisper in the right ear, and her family's reputation would be tarnished forever. But I wasn't going to stop there. I knew Emily had a few affairs she'd kept hidden from me. She thought I didn't know, but I'd seen the way she acted when certain names came up, the way she had acted distant when certain texts lit up her phone. It wasn't hard to figure out who was involved. A few well-placed questions, and I found out everything I needed to know. I had enough material to bury her emotionally, psychologically, and professionally. And I was going to make sure that's exactly what happened. But here's the thing, revenge isn't just about hurting people. It's about destroying their sense of control, their sense of security. It's about taking everything they value and ripping it away from them, piece by piece. That's exactly what I was going to do. I was going to make them feel everything. The execution was the hardest part. I had spent weeks preparing, gathering my weapons, waiting for the perfect moment. And when it finally came, it felt like the world had stopped moving. I had everything in place. David would be exposed for his financial crimes. Emily's family would be torn apart. And the final blow? It would be the most personal of all. I knew where David's weakness was, Emily. She was his obsession, his Achilles heel. I used that against him. I made sure to play my cards carefully. I reached out to David, pretending to be an ally. I gave him the information he needed to expose his own involvement in the money laundering scheme, just enough to get him to trust me. Then, when the time was right, I pulled the trigger. I sent the proof of his criminal activities to every major news outlet, to his rivals, to the authorities. David never saw it coming. His world collapsed in an instant. His empire, his connections, everything he had built crumbled to dust. The man who had once thought he was untouchable was now a fugitive. His reputation was in tatters. He was a pariah, his name whispered only in shame. And when he realized what had happened, when he realized he had been betrayed by the one person he thought was his ally, he would feel the sting of his own actions more deeply than any punishment could ever inflict. But it wasn't enough. I needed to hit him where it hurt most, where it would hurt them both. I turned my attention back to Emily. I knew she would try to salvage whatever was left of her life, but I had one more piece of ammunition left. I leaked her affairs, every single one of them. The public scandal, the fallout with her family, the emotional wreckage it caused, everything was out in the open. When the news broke, Emily's world shattered. The perfect life she had so carefully crafted, the one she had thought would make her bulletproof, was destroyed in an instant. She lost her friends, her family, her career, everything. She was left with nothing. But the final act, the final blow, came when I made sure she knew the truth. I left her a letter, a single page that outlined everything she had done, every single betrayal, every lie. I made her read it, made her feel the weight of her decisions, made her confront the fact that everything she had done had led to this moment. The emptiness. The brokenness. The isolation. And as I watched her fall apart, I realized that revenge had nothing to do with making them suffer. It had everything to do with me taking back control of my own life. It was about me finally getting the closure I needed, the freedom to walk away and never look back. In the end, I didn't need to watch them suffer. They had already lost everything. The emotional high of seeing them fall was nothing compared to the peace I now felt. I had made my stand. And as I walked away from the wreckage of my past, I realized one thing: I had won. This was the end of their story. But mine? Mine was just beginning. It was over. The chaos, the betrayal, the years of heartache, all of it had come crashing down in a moment of pure, calculated execution. As I stood there, watching the dust settle around me, I finally understood what it meant to feel free. David was gone, a ghost of his former self. The empire he had built with lies and manipulation had crumbled in a matter of days. His name was now synonymous with scandal, and no amount of money could protect him from the storm that I had set in motion. His arrogant smile, his cold gaze, gone. He was nothing more than a cautionary tale, a man whose hubris had been his undoing. But it wasn't just David I had destroyed, it was the life Emily had tried to rebuild on the ruins of my trust. She had been so sure she could outrun the consequences of her actions. She had believed she could have it all: David, her family, her reputation, but in the end, she lost everything. Her career was in tatters. Her family? Strangers now. The people who once admired her now whispered behind her back, and the weight of her own guilt would haunt her for the rest of her life. I didn't need to see it in person. The silence that followed the collapse of her world was deafening enough. The way her eyes would search for a way to fix what she had broken, only to realize that there was no fixing it. There was no redemption for what she had done. As for me, I was free. The revenge I had carefully plotted had left me with nothing but a sense of closure. The rage that had fueled me was gone. The pain? Distant now. The scars, though, would remain, but they no longer controlled me. I could walk away from this chapter of my life, knowing that I had taken back everything they tried to steal from me. But even as I stood there, alone, I felt a gnawing pull deep inside me. The world was full of lies, betrayal, and deceit. And there was something about the taste of victory, something about the way it felt to control my own fate, that I couldn't quite shake. As much as I had destroyed, I also knew that the story didn't end here. Not for me. Not for anyone. There were more stories to be told. More people who thought they could get away with things. More faces hiding secrets, just waiting to be uncovered. And I had a talent for uncovering them. I hadn't planned on becoming the man who sought out betrayal and revenge. But now that I had tasted it, now that I had watched it all fall apart around me, I couldn't ignore the pull. I couldn't ignore the need to see justice, real justice, done. But there was more to it. Something bigger, something even darker, was looming on the horizon. As I walked away from the ruins of my past, I felt the weight of something else pressing in. There were whispers in the shadows, whispers of people who had learned from my example. People who had seen what I had done and wanted the same thing. And they were coming for me. The game had changed. And I wasn't done yet. But before all that, I had one more thing to say. If you think the story ends here, think again. There are always more betrayals to uncover, more lies to expose, and more people who will stop at nothing to get what they want. What happens next? You won't want to miss it. If you want to know what happens when the game goes to the next level, when betrayal becomes something far more dangerous than you can imagine, subscribe now. The next chapter is coming, and it's going to change everything. Don't miss it.